first of all, the sources were limited. The rebels were defeated, and so there are very few firsthand accounts, and especially when the Texas narrative was being put together. In the 1850s, 1860s, when people are building the myth of Texas, this story was really poorly known because there were so few survivor accounts. About 2 or 3 of the accounts we have weren't even discovered until after this period. So we didn't really have a lot of information, but it also doesn't fit anybody's narrative. So after the Mexican-American War, Mexico wanted to build a narrative in which America stole their land. And America wanted to build this manifest destiny as if this land was all destined to the United States. This doesn't really fit in either narrative. So neither side wanted to take ownership of the story where the Mexicans and Americans are actually fighting together against Spain. It doesn't really fit into their preconceived notions. It's a very complex story because if you look at it just on the surface of things, and especially if you look and you have your 1836 mindset from Texas history in mind, it really won't make sense because they're different players and different motivations. But you have Spain is essentially being taken over by Napoleon, and the rest of the Spanish Empire has to figure out what to do. And whether that's declare independence or join with Napoleon or whatever, they're trying to figure it out, and that's when the revolution breaks out in Mexico, and of course it spreads to Texas as well. Today I'm going to talk about my name's James Alan Bernsen. I'm originally from Texas. I'm an 8th generation Texan. My book is called The Lost War for Texas, Mexican Rebels, American Burrites, and the Texas Revolution of 1811. Now, a lot of you are probably hearing that and thinking, 1811, what is he talking about? Is he nuts? The Texas Revolution was 1836. We all know that. Well, the one Texas Revolution was 1836. So what if everything you thought you knew about Texas history was wrong? Or maybe just part of the story? Texas actually had 2 revolutions, not just one. And this first revolution was launched by the native Tejanos in San Antonio in 1811. That being said, there were lots of Anglo-Americans who fought in this revolution. In fact, the so-called Mexican Revolutionary Army of the North was almost entirely Anglo-Americans when it started out. And this is 25 years before the Alamo. You have Anglo-Americans fighting for Mexican independence. And this revolution was actually bigger than the Revolution of 1836 when you look at the number of combatants and the number of people killed. So to set the scene, what I call the Texas Revolution of 1811, by the way, it doesn't have a name. It's a whole war that occurred in Texas that really doesn't have a name. There's some historians have called it the Gachapin War, which doesn't make sense to anybody who doesn't know deep Mexican history. But it really didn't have a name, so I had to invent one. And since it started, the events that I pieced together started in 1811, that's what I chose. So it's the Mexican Revolution against Spain as it was fought in Texas. If you remember some Mexican history if you learned it in Texas history or if you just know from Diez y Seis, right? On the 16th of September, 1810, Father Hidalgo in Mexico he calls for revolution. He didn't call for independence, but revolution. And so revolution breaks out in Mexico. 4 months later, it reaches San Antonio. The rebels seize San Antonio in what's called the Casas revolt in January 1811. This doesn't last very long because guess what? The people in Texas didn't have weapons, not very many of them. So they can't really rebel very well. And there's also people in San Antonio who are not entirely sold on the idea of revolution, so it's kind of a civil war environment within San Antonio. So in March 1811, there's a counter coup under a guy named Zambrano that retakes the city for the royalist cause. And they send the previous leader, a guy named Casas, the rebel, send him to Mexico and his head is chopped off. So the next event that comes is what's called the Menchaca filibuster. It's a small event, and we're going to talk about the words in this context. You saw in the title the term Burrites. I'm going to have to define that in a minute. Filibuster, you probably know, but you know for the wrong reasons. The term filibuster in this context has nothing to do with the U.S. Senate, right? Originally, it comes from the Dutch word that means freebooter. So it's basically a pirate or mercenary. And so what a filibuster is in 19th century terms is a mercenary invasion. So this guy named Jose Menchaca he's a Mexican rebel, goes to America and says, hey, I've got a deal for you, let's invade Texas and free it. All these Americans join, and he goes in and he actually betrays his whole army because the Spanish say, hey, we can pardon you or we can kill you. So he takes the pardon. So all the people in his army go back across the border and it kind of dies down. A year later, a lot of the same people are going to join another filibuster called the Gutiérrez-Magee Expedition. And this is the core central part of the story. It's an invasion of Texas that leads to a full-scale war that lasts just about a year. If there's any part of this story that you may have heard if you read Texas history, none of this, by the way, is in the TEKS, in the Texas educational standards for our 7th grade and 4th grade. None of it's in there, actually, except for one name, this Gutierrez guy. His name is in there, but that's it. So the part you've heard of, if anything, is probably the Battle of Medina. So this is the largest battle ever fought in Texas, and it's notoriously lost because we can't find the battlefield. And there are people actually who have this whole cottage industry of trying to find the battlefield. Actually, we only know where two battlefields are in this war, because it took place at a fortress, so we know where that was. The other one because I found a map in the National Archives that shows exactly the same contour of a river that matches where this battle took place. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's go back. So let's talk about the timeline of this invasion. So in August 1812, these American filibusters, think of mercenaries, about 150 of them, really small army. They invade Texas. They're being led by two people. One is an Anglo-American, a former U.S. Army officer who had resigned his commission to join the Mexican Revolutionary Army. And his nominal boss, who's actually been delegated by the revolutionaries in Mexico to do this, is a guy named Jose Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara. And so he comes to America. Originally, he goes all the way to Washington, D.C., meets the president, meets the Secretary of State, and he's trying to get them to support the Mexican Revolution. And they're like, we're about to declare war on England, so I think we got bigger priorities, but good luck. So he goes down to the frontier and starts recruiting people, and he finds, as we'll get into this, a large number of people who want to join this cause. So this army is going to be all Anglo-Americans as they start out. As they advance into Texas and liberate parts of Texas, they're going to get native Tejanos and other Mexican people who happen to be in Texas to join them in their cause. And eventually they're going to bring in more Anglos who are going to come across the border and more Tejanos, and the army is going to actually be about 10 times this size at its largest extent. So a little bit about the historiography. The reason you haven't really heard much about this is the last full-length book, scholarly book that was entirely focused on this revolution was about 80 years ago. In about 1939 is when this one came out, Green Flag Over Texas. So there have been several since then, some smaller books that covered it in a little bit of detail. But it's really kind of been this hard to place conflict. And the reason I talked about this earlier with some folks is it doesn't fit anybody's narrative. Because after the Mexican-American War, the Americans are building their narrative of what's happened in the past 20 years, current events to them, but history to us. And they're building it off the manifest destiny idea that America is going to expand all the way to the ocean. Even when they didn't have manifest destiny in mind at the time, they're building it up that way. The Mexicans, on the other hand, have just lost the Mexican-American War. They've lost all this territory, and so they have a different narrative that they want to build of the evil Anglo-Americans stealing their land. And both are somewhat true, and combined they kind of tell a story. But this war doesn't fit because they're working together. It doesn't fit that narrative, and that's because you can't look at 1811 to 13 with 1836 mindset. It's like trying to look at the Vietnam War as if the Vietnam generation were exactly the same as the World War II generation. People are different. They change. They evolve. And so do the conflicts that they're involved in. So the historical narrative that has been put together in all these books, with the exception of maybe one, is that this filibuster, this invasion, was actually a secret plan by the Madison administration. Remember, the Mexican rebel had gone to meet with the Madison administration, and he said in his diary, Madison said no. But the historians have basically all said, no, Madison was secretly doing this, and he had this American special agent on the frontier who was actually supporting this cause. And that's pretty much what everybody says, and they're wrong. And that's what my book is basically trying to prove. A little bit about me. So I back in the day, I worked in here in Dallas, actually. When 9/11 happened, I decided to join the military. And so I joined and became a naval intelligence officer. And I did deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, also on board the USS Ronald Reagan in the South China Sea. And one of the things I did, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, was I analyzed insurgencies. So I went back and I read every book you could find on Algeria and all these insurgencies back in time. And then I went back after my deployment, and I decided to get my master's in history on the GI Bill. And as I'm looking into this, I find a lot of things going on in 1811 to 13 that really resonate and sound like what I was studying in these modern insurgencies. So what you see, all these sort of things that an insurgency that's being supported by an outside group, whether it's government or an insurgent group like Al-Qaeda had its groups in, working in Afghanistan, and the Taliban did. They have all these kind of things that they have to do, the recruitment, the supplies, everything. And what I found is the things that work in Iraq and Afghanistan, they also work in Texas in 1812. And so that insight gave me a kind of leg up on a lot of previous historians. The other thing that helps my research is I'm writing in the late 20-teens at this point, and I have a lot of advantages that Julia Warren did not have in 1939 when she wrote her book. And for example, when I go to Washington, D.C., and I'm in the National Archives, if I was in 1939, first of all, I'd have to take a train there, and I'd have to have a hotel and do all that kind of thing. And I'd get, however long I have in the National Archives, I had to write notes from all the handwritten sources. And when I went there, I just got my phone and went click, 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 took pictures of every page, and I had about 2,000 documents that I brought back with me. Actually, I took them on my deployment in Afghanistan. I had a hard drive. I had the entire Spanish archives of Texas, 400 years, and all these documents that I'd gotten, and I was able to do the research more methodically than people had done. Now, imagine what's going to happen when AI technology can read handwriting, print it out, and say, hey, you want to look at page 35. And that's the sort of thing that's going to come in the near future. We're going to start seeing things. Of course, with AI, it's garbage in, garbage out. You got to watch everything it does, that it doesn't, put a third arm on somebody in a picture. It does a lot of things, But the technology is really improving, so I had a lot of advantages. It's not just I'm smart, it's just that the technology assisted me. So as I started reading this, I realized the standard version is that the Madison administration led this, supported this invasion. And I found things that just didn't match. So the question then became, if not them, who did this? And that led me to what I thought at the time was kind of surprising, but it all clicked now after I did the research, is the Burr conspiracy. So if you remember, the title has the words Burrites. That comes from Aaron Burr. If you may remember some of this history, it's been a long time since I've been in introductory American history, and I, it's certainly been a few years. So Aaron Burr is Vice President of the United States under Thomas Jefferson. He gets mad at Alexander Hamilton, shoots Hamilton in a duel, kills him. Hamilton dies. He gets a musical. He's famous, right? Aaron Burr doesn't get a musical, right? So no one's out there dancing and saying, I'm Aaron Burr, I'm the hero. So what is he going to do with himself? He's disgraced back east. So he goes west. And what he finds is he's a hero in the West. First of all, nobody in the West liked Alexander Hamilton. They don't tell you this in history, how certain people who we think are lionized people were hated by others or whatever. So he goes out there, and he meets with this really interesting character, a guy named James Wilkinson. So James Wilkinson is the senior officer in the United States Army. He's also a paid spy for Spain. So he's betraying his country to support the Spanish Empire. And what he does as part of this is he says, okay, Spain, I have heard about the secret plot that they want to steal your land. And Spain's like, oh, great, we'll give you some money if you shut it down. Well, he's actually starting the secret plot and then shutting it down. So he's doing all these nefarious things. He's a perfect schemer. He betrays everybody. How did I go backwards? Oh, I went forward. So he betrays everybody in his life except his wife. He's faithful to his wife, but he stabs everybody else in the back. So he and Aaron Burr come up with this idea to invade New Spain. They've talked to some Spanish exiles in Louisiana, and there's a lot of them in Louisiana, which has now recently become part of the United States. And they know the discontent in New Spain, and they see Mexico in a very different light than we do today. We see Mexico as kind of a basket case today. But back then, Mexico produced 1/7 of the world's silver. And so they see this as this glorious, amazing opportunity that they want to take advantage of. And look, if they can free a bunch of people from tyranny and give them republicanism, great. As long as they make money doing it, it's all good. So that's the idea they come up with. And they find that there's already a lot of people on the frontier who like this idea. There's also this kind of side notion, and you may hear this in the history books, that they wanted to seize New Orleans and break it off as part of this country. That's maybe part of the plot. It's never proven in any of the documents, so it may have even been a feint, because they're trying to get the British to fund this, and if the British, think that they're hurting America, they're more likely to do this. So there's all sorts of things they're doing. But the problem is Aaron Burr is telling everybody. It's supposed to be a secret. He's trying to recruit everybody. He's really, really compromising the plan. And Wilkinson, who has no qualms about betraying people, realizes that he's going to get implicated if he doesn't act soon. So he stabs Burr in the back, writes a letter to Thomas Jefferson, says, hey, this Burr guy's been sending me these letters, and I don't know what he's talking about, and you need to arrest him, and I'm going to be the hero, and I'm going to shut it all down. So he goes to New Orleans, arrests all the people in the conspiracy who he knows because he worked with them, and he puts them in prison until the trials happen, and then he basically shuts it down. He's actually not proven to be a Spanish spy until the 20th century, but he was really good at covering his tracks. So in New Orleans, they worked with this group called the Mexican Association of New Orleans, and these were businessmen, again, the people attracted by the allure of Spanish wealth, and they want to invade Mexico, but not just Mexico. Here's their oath that they asked all their recruits to do, to aid the emancipation of Mexico and Peru. So they're not just going to get Texas, they're not just going to get Mexico, they're going to free all of South America, down and find the penguins. So they're going all the way down. So they have really ambitious plans. And they're essentially a bunch of businessmen who think they can win an empire, and that they're going to be part of the elites, probably with some of the locals, but they're going to be the elites of this new nation, and they're all going to get filthy rich. So their plans are well developed, because we learned these plans in the trials after Burr is arrested. And so the original plan was in 1810, or they're going to, first, and actually is originally supposed to be 1806, they're going to invade West Florida, which is not Florida today, but South Alabama and Mississippi. They're going to invade that, and then after that's taken, they're going to take Texas. Well, lo and behold, that's exactly what small groups of filibuster guys will do a couple years later. Even after the Burr conspiracy shut down, people are still doing the plan. And the historians had kind of missed that, but it stuck out to me that, wait a minute, these guys are following exactly the template that had been developed 6 years before. So let's go into the timeline. And for further proof on that point, I took a couple slides out of this. I have a longer version, a shorter version. But there are a lot of people from the Burr conspiracy who were recruited who end up fighting in this filibuster. And that's ultimately how I was able to prove the connection. So the timeline is, in August 1812, this Republican Army of Mexico, it's the Ejército Republicano del Norte de México, but it's all Anglo-Americans except for like 3 guys. And so they invade, and they take Nacogdoches pretty much without a fight, because guess what? They've already been sending in propaganda. The people of Nacogdoches they've been starving for trade. That's another problem that people of Texas are dealing with. They can't trade except for all the way into Mexico, and then Louisiana is 90 miles away. They want to do that. So they come in and they essentially get welcomed as liberators. The Spanish army kind of melts away from them. They march down towards San Antonio. As they go, the small towns, they're actually recruiting Mexican fighters into their army. So it's originally a monolithic Anglo force, but it becomes more and more mixed as they go along. And they're coming towards San Antonio, and the Royalist army gets together in San Antonio, comes out and tries to ambush them on the Guadalupe River near modern New Braunfels. The rebels learn about this from some friendly Indians, who, by the way, are also going to be on their side. And so they go down, they flank the Spanish army and take La Bahia, which is what we today call Goliad. And they're going to be there, and the Spanish are going to follow them down there and trap them in a siege. This is one of the more extraordinary things in Texas history that nobody knows about. This is a 98-day siege. How long, does anybody know how long the Alamo siege was? 13 days. This is 7.5 times longer than the siege of the Alamo. And so it goes all through the winter, the worst months to be in a siege in South Texas. They had literally the whole courtyard of the Presidio. If you've ever been to Goliad, you can see the modern reconstruction of the Presidio. It was all mud and lice, and they had cattle there, and it was just nasty. A lot of people have disease. The American commander, Gutiérrez-Magee, is going to die of disease. And so they're in this siege. There's battles almost every other day, small skirmishes. The first battle is what is called the Battle of the White Cow. And the way this comes about is both sides, of course, are struggling to eat. The rebels have been finding ways through the Spanish forces surrounding them. There's gaps in the lines. They've been sneaking in cattle because the Tejanos know how to get cattle and sneak them in at night. And so they've got cattle. The Spanish have cattle, but they're running out. They've kind of taken all the stuff from the neighborhood. They've been here 2 months by this point. And so the Spanish are about to slaughter a cow, and it gets away and starts running towards the fortress. And the rebels are like, oh, free meat. So they come out, a company of them come out to try to get this cow. The Spanish follow, and they get in a small battle, and then everyone's like, oh, put more people in, then we can win. And so this literally like 5 or 6 guys fighting over a cow becomes 400 people in a battle fighting over a cow. Eventually, the Spanish break off. They lose about 200 men. It's a huge defeat for the Spanish. The rebels lose maybe 5. And in all the accounts, nobody bothered to record who got the cow. So the siege continues going on for a couple more months, and then finally it's going to have a pivotal battle. The Spanish are really running low on supplies. San Antonio has been sacked by the Comanches in the middle of this here, because guess what? The entire Spanish army is at La Bahia. Nobody's in San Antonio. There's just the militia, which has very few guns. So the Comanches come in and they kill like 55 people out of a population of 2,500. It's a pretty good number of people, and they steal a bunch of stuff. And so San Antonio's in bad straits. The people there are mutinous because, first of all, they almost started joining the rebellion the year before anyway, but also they've seen what happens when the Spanish leave, and they don't want to be in this situation. So the Spanish have one last chance. They attack the fortress. It goes very badly. The Anglo-Tejano force repels them, led by 2 commanders, an American guy named Gormley. We don't know his first name. Captain Gormley is what he's called. And Miguel Menchaca, who is growing as a senior commander. He is the leader of the Tejano forces in this rebel force. And they defeat the Spanish, and the Spanish have to give up the siege and return to San Antonio. So the rebels, after recovering, it takes them a while to build up their strength. They follow the Spanish, and the Spanish try to ambush them again on a creek near Rosillo Creek, just southwest of San Antonio. It's kind of hard to see. These are some of the major highways, southeast, actually, of San Antonio. It's kind of, you can't really see the battlefield now. You go there, it's like trailer parks and stuff. But the Spanish are one last attempt to stop the rebels. It's a very poorly organized ambush. The rebels sniff it out, and the rebels counterattack and defeat the Spanish overwhelmingly. And what we're going to see in this war is whichever side breaks first is going to get wiped out. So real life is not a Mel Gibson movie, if you haven't figured that out. So in The Patriot or something, he fires his musket, and then he's running, and he's doing the whole thing. He's loading his musket on the fly. It doesn't work that way, and certainly not in a battle when people are shooting at you. And so what happens is once you decide to run, especially if the enemy has anybody on cavalry, you're going to be cut down. And so what happens is the Spanish lose 400 killed and 70 captured. Remember at San Jacinto they lost 600. So this is just the first, actually this is like the third battle. And they've lost already probably about this number before. So they're already more than San Jacinto. And we have 2 more battles to go. Republican losses are 6 killed because, again, they're not running. They're able to capitalize, and they basically walk into San Antonio unopposed. So the Republicans have taken San Antonio and liberated the capital of Texas. And what this Mexican rebel Gutiérrez was supposed to do is seize land in North Texas, in Texas somewhere, or northern Mexico, declare for the revolution, and then open up the spigot of supplies from the United States. That's the whole idea. He knows that there are all these people in America who want to help out. There's money, there's resources, there's all these great things, and that's going to bring in all these resources to the Mexican rebel cause. Remember, the Mexican rebels don't have a navy, so how else are they going to get supplies? This is how they're going to get supplies. There's one problem with that. He counted on this huge wave of Americans joining his cause, but something else happened called the War of 1812. So the United States declared war on England, the largest empire in the world, and suddenly they're shutting the borders. They're trying to stop anybody going to Mexico to make money fighting their rebel, because they got to defend New Orleans and do all that. So a lot of these supplies that they expect for the march into Mexico just don't come. And so they basically take Texas, but they're kind of like orphans. They're stuck there. They can't really go any much further. But they do a few important things. They had the first Declaration of Independence in Texas history, but also in Mexican history, because Mexico, at this point, has not yet declared independence. They're still, in theory, fighting for the King of Spain, who, by the way, is a prisoner of Napoleon Bonaparte, so he's not really the king. But they're fighting, in theory, for this cause. They haven't declared independence, but the people of Texas said, forget that. We're ready to be independent. And they declare independence and say, as soon as Mexico, the rest of Mexico does independence, we're going to join Mexico. We're going to be part of Mexico. They don't want to be their own country. Texas can't sustain itself with a population of 4,500. They also have a constitution, and basically it says we're going to be part of Mexico. So at this point, it's looking great, right? They got this. They at least have a toehold in Texas. Maybe they'll get American support after the War of 1812 is over. There are still Americans sneaking in past the blockade because they promised to pay them 3 times the U.S. Salaries, even though they have no money. They're based, oh yeah, we'll give you land. This is the constant refrain in Texas history. We don't have any money, but we'll give you land. The problem is things go awry because shortly after they take Texas, the Tejanos are going to take vengeance on some of the Mexican or the captured Spanish royalist officers. So they captured 14 key royalists, and they're going to take them out to the old battlefield for Rosillo and slit their throats. And it's going to really divide the army because the Americans think that they're fighting for freedom, liberty, apple pie, and all these kind of things. And then suddenly there's this thing, they're like, oh, did we join ISIS? What's going on here? Cutting people's heads off. But they don't know what the Tejanos know. The brutal nature of the Spanish regime has really inspired hatred of the people of Texas and all Mexico against the peninsular Spaniards. So this kind of divides the army right at their moment of triumph. Some of the Americans are going to return, but most of them will stay because they kind of accept the fact that, this is the nature of the nature of this kind of warfare. And so the hardcore ones stay. A few guys go back. But the Spanish are not going to let Texas go. Remember what I said, how important this is to the Republican strategy of getting supplies. For the exact same reason, it's important for the Royalists to keep Texas out of rebel control. So the Spanish are going to enter Texas, and actually it's not an invasion force, it's a reconnaissance force led by this guy named Lieutenant Colonel Ignacio Elizondo. He's from Coahuila, and he's very stark in what he says. First of all, he finds that Texas is divided, so he's going to try to play into this. He says he's going to take San Antonio and rescue it from the treason of its inhabitants and the English heretics, the Anglo-Americans being the English, by the way. And he says the rebels have appeared to me sufficient cause for not leaving stone upon stone. And he's going to burn heretics. He's got all this really extravagant language. So Elizondo is not supposed to attack Texas or attack San Antonio, but he sees that the rebels are disunited. So what he does is he sends two letters in San Antonio, one of them to the Tejanos, and says, hey, if you just kill all these Americans, and we will give you a pardon, and we'll just pretend this whole rebellion thing never happened. Then he sends a letter to the Americans and says, if you just kill all the Tejanos, and we'll let you go and be free. Well, the problem is not everybody in San Antonio hates each other. They're putting these letters together and they see what's going on. So they come together, and in the middle of the night, they do a secret march, and they attack Elizondo in the morning. The reason I said I know where the battlefield is because we have this map, which I found in the National Archives, which no one had ever found before. And this shows exactly the outline of Alazan Creek, right outside what is now Sidney Lanier High School in San Antonio. So that is where the battle took place. So this is basically downtown at the time, San Antonio. So that's kind of the heart of downtown. The Alamo's over here. And then the battlefield is west of town. So the other thing about history I want to encourage us to not think is solely in terms of good guys and bad guys. Because a lot of times it's easy to say, oh, the good guys are this guy, these people, and the bad guys are these people. And by the way, invariably, whatever ethnicity or gender or whatever we are, those are the good guys and the other one is the bad guys, right? That's how everybody looks at history, oddly enough. The reality is history is a lot more complex. Sometimes the people who are sort of the good guys are really bad, or sometimes the bad guys are not so bad. In this case, we have rebels fighting for freedom, liberty, democracy, all these kind of things. And so they sneak up on the Spanish and they're going to attack them. And they're like, well, where should we aim our cannon? And they see this massive people gathering and they're like, okay, let's aim our cannon right into that big crowd. Well, when I said mass, it's really a mass. They're having church service. And so they fire off their cannon in the middle of mass. And guess what? The Spanish army mass marches with a lot of camp followers, women and children. Women, children, men and women, all mixed together. So it's a brutal start to this battle. It lasts about 2 hours or so. The Spanish are once again defeated. The rebels will storm into their camp. And the other thing that's going to happen that makes this battle, the Battle of Alazan, particularly brutal, is that by now, the Indians of Texas have joined the rebels. And they're going to be paid by scalps. So they're going to be sent around the flanks, and they're going to attack the Spanish, and they're going to come in with a lot of scalps. And the accounts that you read talk about how many were long-haired, clearly women, scalps, and these kind of things. So it's a brutal battle. And again, 350 Spanish are killed, 50 captured or so, and the Republican losses are 29, including an African-American, actually. So it's again, proves the concept. Whichever side breaks first is going to get wiped out. The rebels actually capture a large amount of supplies. Even though this is a small force, they've got all sorts of muskets and whatever. And so now the people of San Antonio, who, by the way, at this point, the best they've had was pikes maybe, now they've got weapons to arm them. So the Republican army is, at this point, it's about 600, what did I say? Oh, 900. It's going to about double in size to about 1,800. So they're going to bring in this largest Tejano contingent, and that's actually going to be slightly more Tejanos in the army than Anglo-Americans by this point. But the Spanish are not going to quit. So Elizondo was supposed to be scouting for a larger force. He returns to Mexico with the remnants of his force and joins this force under General Arredondo. General Arredondo is a skilled fighter who's fought against rebels all over the place. And he invades with a fresh army with lots of recruits. He has veterans from the wars in Europe, Spanish veterans who have fought there. He also has the Veracruz Regiment, the best in Mexico, with one young lieutenant, a guy named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. This is his first time coming to Texas. And pay attention to what happens, because Santa Anna is taking notes, as you can clearly see by his later conduct. So the forces are about even, possibly slightly larger on the royalist side. This leads to the Battle of Medina. This is the culmination. The rebels at this point, they've won every battle so far. If they win this one battle, there's no more Spanish armies left. They will free literally all of northern Mexico, and the Mexican Revolution, or War of Independence, will probably end 10 years earlier than it actually did. So this is a very important battle. So the rebels are going to have some initial success. The Spanish are going to kind of play into, Arredondo's very smart and very adroit. He's going to play into their fears. He's going to lead a force in there. They're going to retreat. And of course, remember what I said, the retreating army is going to get wiped out. Except the retreating army, in this case, the force, is a cavalry unit. So they can stay ahead of the people pursuing them. And they're going to draw the rebels into a trap. And so the Spanish are going to have like a V shape. It's also described U shape, something like that, where they're going to get the rebels in a trap. It should be the perfect trap. They should have wiped out the rebels. But actually, the rebels fight really hard. It goes on for about 3 or 4 hours. And the Spanish at one point are about to leave the field when a deserter from the rebel cause comes to their side. Now, we talk a lot about what people really believed and what they were fighting for. Remember, a lot of the rebels who were enlisted after they took San Antonio were former royalists. And they were enlisted in the rebel army after their 14 leaders were executed. So they probably didn't necessarily want to be rebels, but it was either rebels or you lose your head, so they decided to be rebels. Well, this guy deserts back to the Spanish cause and tells them, look, we're having it bad, but these rebels are about to break. And so the Spanish buck up, they rally, literally blow the horns and rally the troops, and they push back the rebels, and this time it's the rebels who break. And so the Miguel Menchaca, I mentioned, the Tejano leader, senior Tejano leader, is wounded on one flank. At the same time, an Anglo-American guy named Josiah Taylor is wounded on the other flank, and the two leaders of both wings basically go out of the battle at a crucial moment. The Spanish push, and the rebels flee the field. It becomes a rout, and the rebels lose about 1,000 people on the battlefield, including their hospital. The Spanish find their hospital, kill everyone there, hang the bodies in the trees. It's very brutal. And the royalists are going to pursue everyone into San Antonio. So Arredondo has this brutal history in Mexico. He's learned brutality works, at least in his conception. He uses rape as a weapon of terror, basically to silence people. So he's pretty clear what he's going to do. He said he will put San Antonio to fire and sword, and nothing will remain of it but ruins. So the fact that we even have a San Antonio today is just amazing. So a lot of the refugees are going to flee. They're going to grab whatever they have. Like this one family, they grab a bag with a bunch of corn in it, and that's all they have, going all the way to Nacogdoches. Tejanos will go into Louisiana as exiles. Some of them will stay there 10 years. So when we think of what's going to happen in 1836, and think of the fact that a lot of their leaders had lived in America for several years, it changes a little bit how we see what happens in later years. So Elizondo is going to pursue all the rebels up there. If you want a good news story, I guess if there's any good in such a brutal war, is that Elizondo gets his just desserts because he's the more brutal of the people. And he's so brutal, and of course most of the people he's killing, at some point they decide they're going to let the Anglo-Americans go because they don't want to start a war with America. So they basically decide, okay, Anglo's over here, Tejano's here, and if you got a girlfriend, she's going over there, you're over here, doesn't matter. And they send the Americans away and say, oh, nice Americans, and we're going to pardon these guys, it's okay. The Americans go home and tell these stories about how they pardoned everybody. As soon as the Americans are gone, they kill everybody. And so he's really brutal, and one of his own officers is so shocked by the brutality that he stabs his commander and kills him. And so Elizondo, he actually lives long enough to write the story of how he got stabbed, and then he dies on the way coming back to San Antonio. So in San Antonio, it's even worse. They call it La Noche Triste, the sad night, their night of sorrows. And so just horrible things happen. They basically killing a bunch of people. This is the part I try to, if my son's in the audience, I try to tame it down a little bit, but lots of bad things happen in San Antonio. The men are put in this granary, which is an airless building, because remember, granaries, you want to keep out the mice. So they put about 300 people squeezed into a building, a third the size of this room, maybe. And a whole bunch of them die. The rest are revived and then put to work fixing the streets or whatever. These are the ones who were just sort of tangentially connected to the rebellion. If you're actual real rebel, they just kill you. They're going to execute rebels, and I found an account in the prison, or the records of the Paris Cemetery in San Antonio, where the priest said, okay, the battle's been over 7 months, can I bury the bodies now? They left the bodies lying in the streets of San Antonio for 7 months. So it was pretty brutal. The women get pretty bad conditions too. They get put in this building. You can't really see the picture, it's not so great, but that's a drawing of this building. It's still there actually in San Antonio. It's been heavily changed. But it's this house that's probably, again, maybe a third the size of this room. They put all these women, all the elite women, because all the elites were the rebels. So these are the Canary Islanders, the original settlers of San Antonio who have been there 150 years. And some of these ladies were very wealthy, and they're sitting there for 18 hours a day making tortillas. And they're working for the Spanish army. And there's a brutal commander of this thing who does all these terrible things to the women. If they protest, he takes them up, strips them, and ties them up on a post for everybody to see for several hours and get a little sun, and then maybe they'll change their tune. So it's a terrible situation. The children are tossed out in the streets, even some who were suckling. So one of the future Mexican reformers, who later becomes a leader in Mexico in the 1830s, 1840s, was a child in this and went through it. Juan Seguin was 7 years old at this time. His father has a really interesting history. Erasmo Seguin was implicated by the rebels, but he actually was trying to stay out of it, but they forced him to be a rebel. So ultimately, originally, his family is tossed out of their house, and it's only years later that he gets Spain to admit that he was not involved, and then he gets his land back because they confiscated everybody's land. So it's a really terrible time in San Antonio. I like to say that if you think about it, the entire city of San Antonio would have had PTSD, all the terrible things that they saw. So let's talk about the legacy. Why is this important? Well, first of all, it's the end of Spanish Texas. Spain has broken its own colony. So the population of Texas before was about 3,000, not counting the soldiers. It's about 2,000 after this. So the 1,000 that's missing were either killed or exiled. Some of them came to Louisiana, some of them came back after they got pardons, some of them never came back. Some of the major towns were destroyed. The only towns left, Nacogdoches is down to 3 people, and San Antonio is still there, and Goliad, La Bahia is still there, but that's pretty much it. So what does that mean? You can't just have a depopulated territory and everybody just go back to being normal, life in Spain, because the Comanches have designs on Texas. Comanches are not from Texas originally. They came originally from up in Kansas. They've been displacing other native tribes for years. Now they see Texas as fertile ground. So the Spanish need settlers. And where are you going to get settlers in the middle of a civil war? You're not. So they have to go to the one place they can get them when this guy named Moses Austin shows up in Texas and says, "Have I got a deal for you?" And that changes Texas history dramatically. So Arredondo, the same guy who wrecked Texas, approves Austin's contract, and then later, of course, Stephen F. Austin confirms it with the Mexican government. So another reason why this is connected to history, modern history, or the modern conception of Texas history, is a lot of these people came back. Either they did or their sons, because this is a generation apart. So some of these veterans settled in Texas. I found 18 provable, and based on the numbers, it's probably going to be in the 40, 50 range if I knew all the names, which I don't. So a lot of people came and played important roles in Texas, including a guy who edited the rebel newspaper in 1813. It was the Gazeta de Texas. And then in 1829, he starts the Texas Gazette. It's the same guy. So he's next door neighbor to William Barrett Travis. So if you think of Travis's letter from the Alamo, victory or death, all that kind of hyperbole and all that, he knows what he's talking about, right? Because he's been next door neighbor to the guy who survived this brutal battle in 1813. So you'll see some of them actually the same fighters. You got two guys who in 1813 were kind of junior officers of the Army who saw the first Declaration of Independence signed, and then in 1836 they're older men and they sign the Declaration of 1836. So one Anglo and one Tejano signed the Declaration of Independence in 1836. Texas Secretary of War was a veteran. Lots of these folks, Anglos and Tejanos, although more of the Tejanos were wiped out because they weren't spared in very many numbers. And then, of course, there's a lot of their children, Juan Seguin being one of them. You have two defenders of the Alamo whose fathers fought in this first revolution. And, yeah, just lots of folks. So I'll conclude by talking about why this is relevant. This is a kind of a lost history. It's really not been well discussed in Texas history. A lot of the sources were lost. There's still things out there, and you can piece it together, and that's what I've been doing. And I call it kind of the World War I of Texas history. If you think of 1836 as World War II, right, can you really understand how World War II came about without knowing World War I happened? You really can't. They are very connected. In the same way, this revolution sets the stage for what happens in 1836. It breaks Texas. It makes Texas ungovernable from the Spanish perspective and from the Mexican perspective. This leads to the necessity for foreign settlement, which is what Spain and Mexico end up doing. It also is going to shape future decisions. The Anglo-Americans, the ones who know the story in 1836, fighting here, they're going to see a few trends from this first war, and they're going to look at it, and they're seeing what Arredondo did, and they have this idea that the Spanish are these cruel people, and this actually goes back to Francis Drake and the Spanish Inquisition and all these things way further back in history, but they sort of projected on Mexico, and this actually leads to some of the negative stereotypes of Mexico come from their interpretation of this earlier conflict. The Tejanos, for their part, in 1836, are going to look at this, when Santa Anna is coming up, and they see this army coming in San Antonio, massive army, they're going to say, well, we've seen this movie before, and we don't want to be actors in this version. So a lot of them are going to take their families and run to the hills. And so Texas, and the ones who do fight, they're going to take their families into the Alamo because they'd rather have them there than being raped and killed by the Mexican army because they expect the Mexican army to behave like the Spanish army had. And Santa Anna, most importantly, is going to see the pattern of cruelty that subjugated Texas in 1813 and say, that's what I want to do. I want to replicate that in 1836. So he's going to make the decision, along with his Minister of War, to have no surrender. We're not going to take any prisoners. He wants to be brutal because he wants to drive the people out of Texas. And that's almost what he does through the runaway scrape and all the things that happened during the Texas Revolution. So that's why I like to say this revolution is really, if you think of the major events in North American history, this is really kind of the forgotten story that it's really very important to remember. There's a lot of different things we need to look at when we reinterpret history on this wider timeline. This Burrite ideology, the idea of people acting ahead of their government. They're going to come into Texas not to annex Texas, but because they want individual profit and they want to succeed as revolutionaries. So all these things are going to combine to really make this story very important to a lot of the understanding of how the Southwest developed and how Texas became what it is today. And that's why I think it's the most important forgotten story in American history. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments?
Yes, Clay.
Questions, comments, protest. I'll just walk up and then go back if you don't mind.
Okay.
Anybody up front? Okay, in the back. He raised his hand first.
Great presentation, James.
Thank you.
Is it safe to draw a thread between Arredondo's cruelty in Bayard, going all the way back to say how the Spartan rebels were crucified and left out in the air? Are those linked, or does one inspire the other?
Well, in a general sense, they all are, because all these people are well steeped in ancient classical history, more so the Anglo-Americans. And the reason is the Spanish look at, the leaders know the ancient world. The ordinary Spanish person doesn't. In America, ordinary people are reading Greek and Latin because they're Protestants, because they want to read the Old Testament in the original Greek. Nobody in Spanish territory, other than the elites, is going to read because they don't want them to know anything other than Latin. In fact, they can't even understand their Mass half the time, because the Catholic Church doesn't really want you to reinterpret Scripture. So the Americans are going to see these connections a lot stronger than the Spanish. The Spanish are just going to do it because a lot of times that's how they defeated the Indians. You look at what Cortez did when he goes into Mexico and Pizarro down in Peru and all these things. They see this brutality as a way. In fact, the Americans, Anglo-Americans are not, innocent of wiping out a bunch of Indians, because they see brutality as working, because you cow the survivors into supporting whatever you want. And so this is actually a long history going back to ancient times. You can go back to Assyria, anywhere you want to go, but it's just reinforced, century after century, because it works until you have technology that allows rebellions to fight on and continue beyond those kind of early stages. Thank you. Good question.
Questions, comments? Okay.
Well, I recently went to New Mexico and Taos, New Mexico, and was reading about their rebellion against the Spanish. Was
Right.
this rebellion anywhere outside of Texas at the time?
So there were, because it was the timetable of rebellions in Central and South America is in 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte seizes Spain, and he tosses the king in prison and puts his brother on the throne. And he says, hey, guess what, Spain, you're part of France now, and so is your empire. And so all these places all over the Spanish world say, hey, we're not good with that. So you start to see rebellions happen. What happens with some of the Indian tribes is they see the Spanish are divided, and they think this is their opportunity. So that's where a lot of these Indian rebellions that will happen at the same time is, hey, this is our chance. We can throw out these bad guys. That's exactly what the Comanches in Texas are trying to do. They want to kick the Spanish out and have this Comancheria that takes over the entire state of Texas. So you'll see this throughout Central and South America. And so it's actually going to be several rebellions at a time, where you'll almost see that in Mexico, what they're trying to do is the Creoles, who are the white Spaniards who are born in America, they're fighting against the peninsular Spaniards because they don't have the privileges that they do. But they're going to try to get these Indian grievances and wrap them together. And the whole idea of the Virgin of Guadalupe, that's their banner and all these kind of things, is they know how bad it will be if the Indians have their own rebellion and they're doing their rebellion, because guess what? The Indians outnumber them. And so they're trying hard to steer Indian anger against the Spanish instead of them. And so you'll see that it doesn't always work. And so you'll see, especially in New Mexico, where you had very civilized tribes, which had been independent and and self-sustaining, they're going to see this as an opportunity. Thank you.
Questions, comments? To address your comment earlier, and I don't know that this had anything to do with this conflict, but the Romans did have a policy in their, when a town or a village rebelled, they would kill every 10th male, every adult male, that is, no matter whose side they were on, just to prove a point. It might have been 1 in 8 or 1 in 12, but the point was they wanted to make a point. Now, I don't know whether this is inherited from that, but it's, like you said, it was certainly in the classics.
And you saw that, by the way, in the Mier expedition. This is during the Republic of Texas. Some Texans invade Mexico. They get captured, and the Mexicans they put this jar and fill it with a bunch of beans, and 1 in 10 of the beans is black. And whoever draws a black bean gets shot. And that's directly coming from that old Roman tradition.
Yes, sir.
Whatever happened to Aaron Burr? As this thing collapsed, what happened to his career?
So he gets tried for treason, and everybody who's involved is tried for treason. Nobody's convicted. And the reason, there's a couple things going on in the trial. First of all, they talked a big game, but they hadn't pulled the trigger yet. So the courts are looking at it as, well, it's not proven because they didn't act. They just talked about it. But what also is happening is that John Marshall, the Supreme Court justice who is running the trial, hates Thomas Jefferson, the president. And he doesn't want to give a guilty verdict because that's a victory for Thomas Jefferson. So he massages the verdict to make everybody innocent and basically look like Jefferson's incompetent. So that's going on. Burr he's kind of wrecked in terms of politics in America. He goes to England. When this actually happens, so that was in 1806, the trial's 1807. When this happens, he's actually in England at the time. And he's actually even trying to get England to help out. And if he knew what was going on here, he definitely would have tried to connect England. But the timing just doesn't work. So he's kind of scheming a little bit, but he's really kind of financially broken, needs to borrow money. He eventually comes back to the United States and resumes his legal practice. And he's just kind of this eccentric old man, and it's kind of there's stories of little kids making fun of him. Oh, that's Aaron Burr, and he's just this old guy walking down the street. So interesting story is his daughter, though. Theodosia Burr is one of the most amazing people in history. She's a very highly educated woman. Her mother died in childbirth, so Aaron Burr, for all his failings, was a feminist. So he educated his daughter in everything possible. She knew all these languages, she could play all these instruments, and she was really smart. And right about the time that this happened, she mysteriously vanished on a sailing ship. So the sailing ship went out to sea, and it vanished with no trace. And it's suspected that some pirates or privateers may be involved in the beginning of the War of 1812 were involved, but no trace was ever found. So it's an intriguing mystery.
Anybody else? This is one of the most distinguished pedagogues in America today.
It's ridiculous. I was wondering, so like in 1835, 1836, you've got, it's not that well known, but there's revolts all over Mexico, not just in Texas.
Yes.
Was anything like that going on in 1811, 1812?
Yep. So the Mexican Revolution is very complex. It's actually think of concentric circles. The Spanish controlled Mexico City, but there's a circle of rebels around it. And then there's another circle of Spanish control, at least on the northern side, that's blocking the Texas rebels from connecting. And that's where Arredondo comes in that gap and attacks. So there's revolts all over. In theory, they're all responding to the call from Father Hidalgo, but there's also commanders who want to get a name as as the hero, right? There's this guy named Ignacio Rayon who leads an army in central Mexico, and every one of them wants to be the winner and become the George Washington of Mexico. And most of them are progressively defeated by the Spanish, and the way the revolution's actually going to end is not with a battlefield victory. It's going to be years after most of the fighting is done, and the Spanish viceroy in Mexico sees that after 10 years, Spain's still in chaos, so he says, well, I'm now the king of Mexico and emperor of Mexico. And that's literally how Mexico becomes independent. He just says, oh, we're independent now. And then ultimately they kind of get the Republican forms in the 1824 Constitution. But you're right, Mexico is riven by revolts and problems throughout all its formative period. There are actually 10 Mexican provinces in rebellion at the same time as Texas. And what makes Texas different is it has foreign support. And that's why, and so to some degree does the Yucatan, which has sea connections. So those are the best ones that happen, the best revolts in 1835, 1836. But there's also, a story that really needs to be understood to understand what's going on in Texas is there's a province called Zacatecas, and the Mexicans come in and kill a bunch of people. Santa Anna's doing what he saw Arredondo did. He takes the capital and slaughters a whole bunch of people. And that quells the rebellion in that area. And that news had reached Texas, and that's one of the things that drove, when the Texans were talking about rebelling, they hear this news and they're like, okay, yeah, we're done. We're going to get out of Mexico. And so a lot of these events, they're really connected, but in all sorts of complex ways. I don't like soundbite answers to history when people say, what was the Alamo about? Was it about slavery? Was it about this? Was it about that? That's not how history works. It is very complex. It's like a spider web of all these different things. Sometimes you have people who are working on the same side but have different visions of the future. So you have to just understand it's complex, and that's what makes it alluring and interesting for us, because we're always going to uncover new ways to see it.
I'll ask the last two questions. Sure. One is, we had the author of a book on Francisco Ruiz here several years ago. And
he's a good friend of mine. He's a friend of mine.
Oh, okay. And great guy.
Yep.
He made it very clear that Francisco Ruiz was a small miner, and he saw this barbaric activity, and he didn't want any part of the Spain coming back in, or that's why he fought very hard for the revolution, and that was one of his motivating.
Right. Well, so on Francisco Ruiz, so he starts off, he's in the Spanish army. In the siege of La Bahia, he's the quartermaster. He's been injured in a battle, so he can't. He's kind of on limited duty, so he's chosen as quartermaster, and he just sees the incompetence of the Spanish, and he starts this gradual conversion to, he hears what the rebels are fighting for. He's like, I kind of agree with that. But what's interesting is after the rebellion, he goes to Louisiana. He spends 9 years in Louisiana, living in America. And he actually creates a rebel command structure as a government in exile. This is something I discovered that no one had ever found before. There was actually a Texas government in exile in Natchitoches, Louisiana for about 3 or 4 years. And Ruiz was leading it. And I have all these documents where he's writing in the name of the state of Texas, and he's in Louisiana. And so he's one of the early converts. And a lot of these Tejanos who went, they get this in their mindset. They've connected to the Anglo-Americans. They have great ties with them. Jim Bowie marries into the Veramendi family in San Antonio. And that's not a coincidence, because he's real close to the people he lives with in Louisiana are all veterans of this war. So they're connecting him to these people, and these networks are developing across the border. That's why in 1830, in the 1820s, when American settlers come in, a lot of the Tejanos see them as more our kind of people, because they're frontier people. They have some of the same issues, and Mexico is so far and distant.
Didn't Ruiz sign the Republic of Texas independence?
Yes.
You talked earlier about the Spanish royalists didn't want the average citizen to read Rousseau, but yet they all read Rousseau.
Right, and it's kind of the irony is that the Spanish Inquisition said you can't read any of these liberal texts or whatever, but all the leaders of Spain were reading them for ways to improve government and make it more efficient. They just don't want all the stuff that comes with it. So they want the technical superiority of England, but they don't want the liberty and everything that to distill down to the common people.
James Bernsen, thank you so much. Tell them about your book.
All right, thank you. So I've got a number of copies of my book if someone wants to buy it. I'll double check actually right now what the price is because A&M Press gives me the price and they've actually changed it once or twice. So I'll verify whatever it is. It was $75 originally. I think it may have gone down. I'll let you know. If you don't want to buy it today, if you think about it, you can buy it on Amazon. You can also take my card, and if you know somebody it might be interested, give it to them. And if you want a signed copy, just send me an email, and that way I can get you a copy directly from me, because if you buy it from Amazon, obviously it's not going to be signed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.